She was not lost. She was waiting for the one man who still believed fire only knew how to take. Staff Sergeant Owen Miller saw the German Shepherd at 6:18 on a cold Colorado evening, standing in the middle of a narrow forest road outside Estes Park, where the pines grew black against a sky the color of old steel. Owen was 38, a white U.S. Marine with close-cut brown hair, broad shoulders, and gray-blue eyes that carried more winter than they should have. He wore a dark canvas field jacket over a faded navy shirt, jeans, and boots dusted with gravel from the cemetery where he had stood that afternoon at his father's memorial. He had driven for miles without turning on the radio, letting the mountain silence fill the pickup, because silence was easier than memory. Then his headlights found her. The German Shepherd stood perfectly still where an old service road split from the pavement and disappeared into a burn scar left by last summer's wildfire. She was full-grown, sable black and tan, lean but strong, with rain-dark fur along her shoulders and amber eyes fixed on him through the windshield. She did not bark. She did not step aside. She simply watched, as if she had been counting cars all day, and his was the first one that mattered. Owen eased onto the brake. The truck idled. Pine needles shifted across the road in the wind. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered over the ridge. "Come on, girl," he murmured, though the windows were closed. "Do not make me guess." The Shepherd turned her head toward the burned service road, then looked back at him. Around her neck hung a weathered collar with a small metal tag, blackened along one edge. When she stepped closer to his headlights, one word caught the light beneath the soot: mercy. Owen's hand tightened on the steering wheel. He hated the smell that came from that road. Even from where he sat, he could sense it beneath the damp earth, the faint ghost of smoke held in old timber and cold ash. It reached into him with familiar fingers. He was 12 again, standing barefoot in wet grass while red light spun against his childhood home, hearing adults say his little brother's name in voices that meant the world had changed forever. Owen looked away from the service road. "No," he whispered. The dog took 3 steps into the darkness, then stopped. She turned back and waited, not impatient, certain, the way a messenger waits after delivering news no one wants to hear. Owen opened the truck door, and mountain air swept in, sharp with pine, wet stone, and the old ash smell he had spent most of his life avoiding. His boots touched the ground. The Shepherd's ears lifted. Up close, he saw mud on her paws, burrs in her fur, and the calm exhaustion of an animal that had walked the same path too many times. "You are not lost, are you?" he said. She blinked once, then turned toward the road again. Owen stood beside the pickup, rain beginning to tick against his jacket, looking down the blackened trail where the trees stood like quiet witnesses. Every part of him wanted to get back in the truck, call the sheriff, and let someone else follow whatever waited there. But the Shepherd looked back one more time, and in her amber eyes was something he could not name without lowering his guard. Not fear, not hunger, a promise. Owen reached into the truck for his flashlight, shut the door softly, and followed her into the ash. Owen kept the flashlight low, its beam moving over damp needles, blackened bark, and patches of pale grass pushing through the burned ground. The German Shepherd walked ahead of him with quiet certainty, never more than 20 feet away, never so far that he could pretend she had forgotten him. Every few yards, she stopped and looked back, not begging, measuring, making sure the man behind her had not surrendered to the road in his own mind. The service road climbed gently through the scarred forest, where last summer's fire had left the trees standing thin and dark, their branches lifted like hands that had asked for rain too late. The air smelled of wet stone, pine resin, and old smoke buried under the soil. Owen tried to breathe through his mouth, but memory had no respect for method. It came anyway, a childhood hallway filled with heat, his father's arm around his chest, holding him back, his little brother's blue blanket found later by a firefighter who did not know what to say. Owen's steps slowed. The beam of his flashlight shook once against a tree trunk. The Shepherd noticed. She turned and walked back to him, paused silent on the ash-soft road. Up close, her amber eyes seemed older than fear. She did not press against him. She simply stood in front of him, blocking the path forward without forcing him toward it. Owen let out a breath he had been holding for 26 years. "I do not like this place," he said. The dog blinked, rain silvering her whiskers. "Guess you already knew that." A low sound moved through her chest, not a growl, not a whine, something closer to recognition. Then she turned and continued uphill. Owen followed. After a quarter-mile, the road narrowed and curved around a rocky slope. Tire ruts had hardened in the mud, washed smooth by recent weather. But beside them were paw prints. Many of them. The same size. The same direction. Back and forth, over and over, pressed into the earth where the trail dipped near a fallen gate. Owen crouched and touched one print with 2 fingers. It was not fresh from tonight only. Some edges were softened by older rain, others sharp from this evening. She had walked this road more than once. Maybe for days. Maybe longer. "Who were you trying to bring here?" he whispered. The shepherd waited near the gate, the tag on her collar catching the light again. Mercy. Then the porch steps, blackened but still holding their shape. Then the cabin itself, or what remained of it. No flames now. No heat. Rain tapped against his jacket. The old smoke smell was stronger here, braided with soaked cedar and cold stone. His chest tightened until the air felt too narrow. "No," he said again, but the word had less force this time. The shepherd climbed the porch steps and moved toward the stone fireplace at the center of the ruined cabin. She lay down beside it, placing one paw on a patch of ash that looked disturbed, lighter than the rest, as if she had touched that spot many times before. Owen stood in the clearing, one hand closed around the flashlight, and understood with a quiet dread that she had not brought him to a place. She had brought him to a message. Owen did not step onto the porch right away. He stood at the edge of the clearing while rain gathered on his sleeves, and the flashlight beam trembled over the broken boards. The German shepherd remained beside the fireplace, one paw resting on the disturbed ash, her body low, her eyes fixed on him with a patience that felt almost human. The cabin held its silence around them. A chair frame leaned near the wall. A cast-iron pan lay half-buried in gray dust. The stone chimney rose through the open roofline, dark against the evening sky, as if it had kept standing only to mark where a life had once been warm. Owen forced himself forward. One step, then another. The porch creaked beneath his boots, not dangerously, just old and tired. He followed the dog to the fireplace and crouched where her paw had pressed. The ash there was cooler than he expected, damp from months of weather, but loose, not packed like the rest. He used the edge of his flashlight to move it aside carefully. Beneath the ash was a flat metal box, blackened on the outside but still sealed. His breath caught. The shepherd lifted her paw and sat back, as if her part of the first message was done. "Is this what you wanted me to find?" Owen asked. The dog's ears shifted forward. He wiped the box with his sleeve and found a small latch stiff with grit. It opened with a soft scrape. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were things the fire had not touched. A faded photograph of an older man in a marine dress uniform, standing on this very porch years earlier with a younger version of the shepherd at his side. A worn dog tag stamped with the name Henry Whitcomb. A small leather collar tag marked Grace. And beneath them, folded twice, a note written in a careful hand. Owen held it under the flashlight and read the words slowly. "If Grace comes back, follow her." The mountains seemed to go still. Owen looked at the shepherd. "Grace," he said. Her head lifted at the name, not with surprise, but with recognition so complete it felt like the cabin itself had answered. He read the note again, lower this time, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever had survived here. "If Grace comes back, follow her." Below the line was another sentence, weaker, written as though the hand had trembled near the end. "What I could not carry out, she will remember." Owen felt the old cold move through him, not from the rain, from understanding that this was not finished. Grace stood before he did. She turned away from the fireplace and walked through the ruined room toward the back of the cabin, stepping around fallen beams and blackened floorboards with the care of someone who knew every inch. Owen put the note back into the box, tucked the dog tag into his palm, and followed. Behind the cabin, where the slope dropped toward a narrow creek bed, Grace stopped near a section of warped flooring partly covered by wet leaves and ash. She lowered her nose to a seam in the boards and breathed in sharply. Then she looked up at him. Owen heard it then, so faint he might have missed it if the rain had been heavier. A small sound from below the floor. Not a call, not a scratch. A breath. Thin, uneven, alive. Owen's throat tightened until he could barely speak. Grace stepped back, giving him room, her amber eyes bright in the fading light. He knelt, brushed away leaves with both hands, and found the edge of a small trapdoor hidden beneath the debris. Owen froze. The puppy's chest rose. Fell. Rose again. Grace lowered herself beside the opening and gave the softest whine Owen had ever heard. Not fear now, but relief. Owen reached down with both hands, gentle as prayer, and lifted the little body from the dark. The puppy fit against his chest like a secret the fire had failed to claim. For a long moment, Owen could not move. He stood in the ruins with Grace at his side, Henry's dog tag in his palm, and a living breath against his heart, realizing that the place he had feared had not brought him back to loss. It had brought him to what remained. Owen wrapped the puppy inside his field jacket and held him close beneath his chin, feeling for every small breath, as if counting could keep the little body tethered to the world. Grace stayed at his side while he gathered the metal box, Henry Whitcomb's dog tag, and the folded note, then guided him back through the ruined cabin with the same quiet certainty that had brought him there. The rain had softened to a mist, but dusk was falling fast over the Colorado trees. The burned trunks stood around them like dark pillars, and the road back seemed longer now because Owen was carrying something that could still be lost. He moved carefully down the service road, one arm shielding the puppy from the cold, the other holding the flashlight low. Grace walked ahead for several steps, then returned, then walked ahead again, as if she were pulling the whole night toward help. By the time they reached the pickup, Owen's shirt was damp and his hands were stiff, but the puppy was still breathing. "Stay with me," he whispered, opening the passenger door. Grace jumped in first, turned once, and lowered herself on the seat as though she had done this in another life. Owen placed the puppy gently against her side, still wrapped in the jacket. Grace bent her head and touched her nose to him, soft and exact. The pup gave one faint sound, barely more than air. Owen started the truck and searched his phone. One bar appeared, disappeared, then returned. He called the nearest veterinary clinic listed in Estes Park. A woman answered on the fifth ring, her voice tired but alert. "Bennett Animal Clinic." Owen spoke quickly but calmly, giving his name, his location, and what he had found. The woman on the line went silent for a heartbeat when he mentioned the burned cabin and the German shepherd with the mercy tag. Then her voice changed. "Is the dog Sable, female, about 6 years old?" Owen looked at Grace. Her amber eyes were fixed on the puppy. "Yes." The woman inhaled softly. "That is Grace. Bring them in. I am Dr. Claire Bennett. I will meet you at the side entrance." The drive down the mountain was only 11 miles, but it felt like crossing a winter. The road curved between wet pines and rock walls, headlights sweeping over guardrails and low clouds. Owen kept the heater high, one hand on the wheel, one glance always returning to the passenger seat. Grace did not sleep. She curled around the puppy without crushing him, her body steady against each turn. Once, when the puppy's breath grew too quiet, Grace nudged him with her nose until he moved again. Owen felt that small movement like a prayer answered in a language older than words. Bennett Animal Clinic glowed at the edge of town, a low brick building with warm windows and a porch light cutting through the mist. Dr. Claire Bennett was waiting in a fleece jacket over scrubs, silver-streaked brown hair pulled back, face open with concern and recognition. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She led them inside, where the room smelled of clean towels, antiseptic, and warm air. Grace followed Owen straight to the exam table, then stood on her hind legs long enough to watch as Claire unwrapped the puppy. "Oh, little Ash," Claire whispered before she seemed to realize she had named him out loud. Owen looked at her. "Ash." Claire touched the puppy's chest with 2 fingers, listening to the faint rhythm. Henry always said if he ever found a pup after a fire, he would call him Ash. He had a way of naming hope before it arrived. Owen placed the metal box on the counter. The dog tag clicked softly against the surface. Claire saw it and closed her eyes for a second. "Henry Whitcomb was a Marine," she said. "Old school, stubborn as mountain stone. He rescued Grace from a winter ditch years ago. After that, she went everywhere with him." Grace laid down beside the exam table, nose pointed toward the puppy, body finally trembling now that someone else had taken the weight of urgency. Claire worked beneath a heat lamp, warming Ash slowly, offering drops of fluid, checking each breath without rushing the miracle into a promise. Owen stood close, silent, rain drying on his jacket, the smell of smoke still clinging to his hands. For the first time since childhood, he did not pull away from it. He only watched the small chest rise, fall, and rise again. The clinic settled into a hush that made every small sound feel sacred. The soft hum of the heat lamp, the faint tick of rain against the windows, the tiny breath of the puppy who should not have been found, rising and falling beneath Claire Bennett's careful hands. Owen stood beside the exam table with Henry Whitcomb's dog tag resting in his palm, its metal warmed now by his skin. Grace lay on the floor below, her head on her paws, amber eyes open and fixed on Ash as if sleep could wait until hope was safer. Claire worked without hurry, because some lives return slowly and have to be invited back gently. She warmed towels in a small dryer, offered the puppy drops from a syringe, listened to his chest, then smiled only when the next breath came steadier than the last. "He is weak," she said, "but he is fighting." Owen looked down at Ash, so small inside the towel, his coat gray with soot-colored markings, his nose tucked into the edge of Owen's field jacket, as though he remembered the way out of the dark. How could he still be there? Owen asked. Claire did not answer right away. She adjusted the heat lamp, then looked toward Grace. Henry had an insulated storage space under the cabin floor. He used it for supplies during winter storms. If Ash was placed there with that jacket, he had warmth, shelter, and just enough protection from the weather. Not for long, but long enough. Grace lifted her head at Henry's name. Claire's voice softened. Henry came to this clinic 2 days before he went to the hospital. He was worried about storms rolling over the ridge. He told me he had taken in a young puppy someone left near the trailhead. Said Grace had adopted him before Henry could argue. Owen looked at the dog tag in his hand. He knew he might not come back. Claire nodded slowly. I think he did. He handed me a spare key, told me that if Grace ever showed up alone, I should follow her. Then he said something I did not understand until tonight. Owen waited. Outside, thunder faded beyond the hills. Claire looked at Grace, then at the puppy. He said, "She will know where Mercy is buried." The words moved through Owen quietly, but they did not leave him unchanged. He thought of the tag on Grace's collar, the note in the box, the paw prints worn into the service road by a dog who had gone back again and again, not knowing how to open the hidden place, only knowing that something there still mattered. He sat down on the floor beside Grace. The German shepherd shifted closer and rested her shoulder against his knee. For a long time, neither of them moved. Owen could smell smoke on his sleeves, not strong, not fresh, just the ghost of it. For most of his life, that smell had been a door slamming shut. Tonight, with Ash breathing under warm light and Grace leaning into him, it became something else. A place where loss had not been the final word. Claire placed Henry's note on the counter beside the metal box. He trusted her, she said. Owen ran his thumb over the dog tag, and she waited until someone trusted her back. Grace exhaled, deep and tired, as if that was the whole truth. Morning came to Estes Park beneath a veil of pale clouds, with the mountains half hidden and the streets shining from the night's rain. Owen had not slept. He sat in the corner of Bennett Animal Clinic with Grace stretched beside his chair and Ash resting beneath the heat lamp in a nest of warm towels. Every hour, Claire checked the puppy's breathing, his temperature, and the tiny strength returning to his body. Every time Ash moved, Grace lifted her head. Every time he settled, she settled too. It was as if the old shepherd had given herself one final duty from Henry Whitcomb and would not lay it down until the little life was safe. Near 8 o'clock, Sheriff Tom Walker arrived with his hat in his hands and the careful quiet of a man used to bringing news gently. He was in his late 50s, broad through the shoulders, with weathered skin and tired brown eyes that had seen enough mountain grief to respect silence. Claire met him near the counter and gave him the metal box, the note, and Henry's dog tag. Tom read the paper twice. His face did not change much, but his throat moved when he swallowed. Henry always did right like he expected the world to listen, he said softly. Owen stood. You knew him? Tom nodded. Everyone up here knew Henry. Former Marine. Lived alone by choice, but never selfishly. He cleared snow for neighbors who could not pay, fixed fences, fed strays, checked on widows after storms. His eyes shifted to Grace, and that dog was his shadow. Grace's ears moved at the sound of Henry's name. Tom knelt slowly and offered his hand. She sniffed him, then allowed his fingers to touch the top of her head. I wondered where she went after the fire, he said. We looked for days. Claire glanced at Ash. She went back. Tom nodded, but his eyes had grown wet. Of course she did. The sheriff explained what the records showed. Henry had been taken to the hospital 3 days before lightning struck near the ridge and the old cabin caught during the storm. No one had been inside. No one had known about the puppy hidden below the rear floorboards. Henry had meant to return or send someone, but his health failed faster than anyone expected, and the message he left had waited in the ashes with the only creature loyal enough to keep trying. Owen listened without speaking. The facts were simple. The meaning was not. Grace had walked that road again and again, carrying a command no human had heard, not because she understood paperwork or property lines or death certificates, because love had shown her where something fragile had been placed, and love had told her to find help. Tom looked at Owen. Why did she choose you? Owen glanced down at Grace, who had rested her head against his boot. I do not know. Claire's voice came from beside the heat lamp, gentle but certain. Maybe she did. Ash gave a soft sound then, small and raspy, but stronger than the night before. Grace stood instantly. Owen stepped closer too. The puppy's eyes were still closed, his body still weak, but he pushed his nose against the edge of Owen's field jacket and breathed as if the world, for the first time, had become warm enough to trust. Owen felt something inside him loosen. He thought of his brother, of the house from long ago, of all the years he had believed fire only knew how to empty a room. But here was Ash, breathing under golden light. Here was Grace, scarred by smoke and rain, still faithful. Here was Henry's dog tag resting beside his note, not as an ending, but as a hand reaching forward. Owen looked at Sheriff Walker. What happens to them now? Tom looked to Claire. Claire looked to Grace. Grace looked only at Owen. And somehow, before anyone answered, the room already knew. Owen stayed at Bennett Animal Clinic through the next 2 days, though no one asked him to. He told himself it was because Ash still needed watching, because Grace relaxed when he sat nearby, because Claire sometimes needed help carrying towels or walking dogs from the boarding room. But beneath those practical reasons was a quieter truth. For the first time in years, he did not want to run from the smell of smoke on his jacket. He wanted to understand why it no longer felt like only grief. Ash grew stronger by inches. He took drops from a syringe, then a little formula from a bottle, then began making small, determined sounds whenever Grace moved too far from the table. Claire laughed the first time it happened, a soft, surprised laugh that made the whole clinic feel less like an emergency and more like a beginning. He has opinions, she said. Owen looked at the tiny puppy nestled in the towels. He earned them. Grace never left his side for long. She would stand guard near Ash, then cross the room and settle beside Owen's boots, then return again, as if caring for both of them had become the same mission. On the third afternoon, Sheriff Walker brought an envelope from Henry Whitcomb's attorney. It had been held with instructions to deliver it only if Grace was found. Inside was one more note, shorter than the first, written in the same careful hand. Owen read it beside the exam table while Grace watched him. Whoever followed her, thank you. She does not choose lightly. If the little one survived, give him a home with someone who knows what it means to come through fire. Owen lowered the paper slowly. Claire did not speak. Tom looked out the window. Grace stepped closer and pressed her head against Owen's hand. The choice in the room was not loud. It simply stood there, breathing. That evening, Owen drove back to the cabin with Sheriff Walker. Grace came with them, riding in the back seat, calm but alert, while Ash stayed safe at the clinic under Claire's care. The sky had cleared, and the mountains glowed blue beneath the last light. At the clearing, Owen walked into the ruins without stopping at the edge. The ash still smelled faintly of rain and old smoke, but it no longer closed around his throat. He carried a small canvas bag with Henry's dog tag, the metal box, and the note. Near the stone chimney, he knelt and brushed away leaves from a patch of earth where green shoots had begun to rise through the gray. I thought places like this only remembered what was gone, Owen said. Tom stood a few feet away, hat in his hands. Sometimes they remember what was protected. Grace walked to the fireplace and lay down where Owen had first found the box. She looked peaceful there, not trapped by the past, only faithful to it. Owen touched Henry's dog tag once, then placed it back in the metal box for safekeeping. He did not know yet how to rebuild anything. Not the cabin, not himself. But for the first time, the question did not frighten him. As they left, Grace paused at the service road and looked back, not with urgency this time, but farewell. Owen understood. The message had been delivered. What survived was no longer hidden. Owen brought Grace home 1 week later, when Ash was strong enough to leave the clinic wrapped in a blue towel and sleeping basket. Home was a small rented cabin on the edge of Estes Park, not far from the road that climbed toward the mountains, with a narrow porch, a wood stove, and windows that looked out over pine trees moving softly in the wind. Owen had chosen it because it was quiet, temporary, and easy to leave. He had not expected anything there to need him. But Grace stepped through the door like she had been there before, nose low, ears forward, checking each corner with calm authority. Ash woke just long enough to make a tiny sound from the basket, and Grace turned at once, touching him with her nose before lying down beside him on the rug. The cabin changed by evening. Claire had sent formula, towels, instructions, and a look that said she trusted Owen more than he trusted himself. Tom Walker had dropped off a repaired puppy crate and a bag of food. Someone from town left firewood stacked near the porch with no note. Mercy, Owen was learning, often arrived without signing its name. Days passed in small rituals. Ash drank, slept, grew warmer, and began to wobble toward Owen's boots whenever he heard his voice. Grace watched everything. She rested more now, finally allowing her body to believe the mission had ended. Sometimes, while Ash slept, she would stand at the window and look toward the mountains, where Henry's cabin waited in the burned scar. Owen would stand beside her without speaking. He no longer avoided the sight. One afternoon, he drove back there alone with a rake, gloves, and a folding wooden bench from a thrift store in town. He did not rebuild the cabin. Not yet. He only cleared a quiet space near the stone chimney, removed fallen branches, and set the bench where sunlight reached through the blackened trees. Then he found something that made him stop. Beside a scorched stump, no taller than his hand, a young pine had begun to grow. Green needles, new and stubborn. Owen knelt in the ash and touched the soil beside it. For the first time in years, he thought of his brother and did not see only the night he lost him. He remembered the boy laughing with cereal milk on his chin. He remembered muddy sneakers by the door. He remembered life before the ending, and somehow that memory did not punish him. It warmed him. That evening, he returned with Grace and Ash. Grace walked straight to the bench, circled once, and lay down in the last gold of the day. Ash, still unsteady, crawled across Owen's boot and fell asleep halfway there. Owen took Henry's dog tag from his pocket and held it beside his own. 2 Marines. 2 names. 2 stories marked by fire, but not finished by it. He hung both tags gently from a low branch of the young pine. They touched once in the breeze, a soft metal sound against the quiet. Grace lifted her head. Owen looked at the small tree, the sleeping puppy, the dog who had remembered what no one else could, and whispered, "I thought fire only took." The wind moved through the pines, and the tags answered softly. For once, Owen did not need the rest of the sentence explained. By late summer, the burn scar above Estes Park had begun to soften. Grass returned first, thin and pale, then wildflowers no one had planted, small blue and yellow faces lifting from the ash as if the earth had been waiting for permission to hope again. Owen visited the old cabin every Sunday morning with Grace walking beside him and Ash bounding ahead on uncertain paws, bigger now, stronger, his gray sable coat brightening in the mountain sun. The ruined chimney still stood, and the porch was still gone, but the clearing no longer felt abandoned. The wooden bench stayed beneath the young pine. Henry's dog tag and Owen's dog tag hung together from the low branch, moving when the wind came down from the ridge. Their sound was quiet, a soft metal whisper, but to Owen it felt like prayer without words. He had not rebuilt the cabin. Not yet. He had only cleared a path, set stones around the young tree, and left a bowl of fresh water nearby for hikers and dogs who passed through. Claire came sometimes with supplies. Sheriff Walker came once with Henry's old photograph in a simple frame, and they placed it in a weatherproof box near the bench beside the note that had started everything. Grace always approached that place slowly. She would sniff the ground, touch the box with her nose, then lie in the sun as if reporting that the promise had been kept. Ash never understood the sadness of it. He only knew light, pine needles, Owen's boots, and the safe warmth of Grace's side. Maybe that was the mercy, not forgetting the fire, but letting something young grow without carrying all of its smoke. One morning, Owen sat on the bench while Ash slept across his boot and Grace rested her head on his knee. The air smelled of pine, rain-wet stone, and faint ash deep in the soil. For the first time, the scent did not pull him backward. It held him still. He thought of his brother, not as a final night, but as a laughing boy racing through sprinklers, pockets full of rocks, hair bright in summer light. Owen closed his eyes, and the memory stayed gentle. When he opened them, Grace was watching him with those amber eyes that had led him into the place he feared most. He placed his hand between her ears. "You brought me back," he whispered. The tags moved in the breeze. Ash stirred, sighed, and settled again against his boot. Around them, the young pines stood green against the black trunks of the old forest. Some stories do not end where the flames stop. Some begin in the ashes, carried by a faithful dog, a small surviving breath, and a man brave enough to follow. What survived inside that cabin was not only a puppy. It was Grace, waiting patiently for someone to come home.